They've been trying to read you, measure you, define you, and every single time, they fail. Not because you're hiding, but because what you are doesn't exist on their scale. The quantum field just confirmed it. Your frequency is too advanced for them to detect. So before you scroll, do this right now. Like this video, subscribe, and comment the word undetectable if you've ever felt like no one truly understands you. Because what I'm about to reveal will either wake you up or it will lose you completely. Chapter 1. The feeling why no one can read you there has always been something different about you, and you felt it long before you had words to explain it. It shows up in conversations, where people nod at what you're saying but somehow completely miss the meaning behind it. It shows up in rooms where you're surrounded by people, yet internally, you feel like you're standing in a completely different reality. You've tried to simplify yourself, to translate your thoughts into something more digestible, more acceptable, more normal. But no matter how much you adjust, something still doesn't land. People misunderstand you, mislabel you, or sometimes even avoid you altogether, not because you're unclear, but because they cannot fully receive what you're transmitting. And deep down, you know this isn't about communication skills or social ability. This goes deeper than personality. This is energetic. You've probably been told at some point that you're too much, or too intense, or hard to figure out. Maybe they've called you mysterious, distant, or even unpredictable. But what they're really reacting to is not confusion, it's limitation. Their perception has a range, a bandwidth, a frequency window it can operate within. And you don't fit inside that window. So when they try to interpret you, it's like trying to tune into a signal that's broadcasting from a completely different spectrum. All they get is fragments, static, incomplete data. And when the mind cannot understand something, it tries to reduce it into something it already knows. That's why they misread you. That's why they label you incorrectly. That's why they think you're the problem. But you've also felt the other side of this, the silence, the isolation that comes from knowing that even when you're present, even when you're trying, something about you remains out of reach. You felt that strange kind of loneliness that doesn't come from being alone, but from being unseen. Not physically unseen, but energetically unrecognized. It's like your full signal is never fully received by anyone around you, and over time that can make you question yourself. It can make you wonder if something is wrong with you. If maybe you are too complicated, too different, too disconnected. So you try to adapt, you lower your intensity, you filter your thoughts, you dim parts of yourself just to fit into conversations, relationships, environments that were never designed to hold you in the first place. And for a moment, it works. You blend in, you become more understandable. But something inside you always resists it. Because every time you shrink yourself, you feel it. That internal misalignment, that quiet frustration, that sense that you're betraying something essential about who you are, just to be accepted by people who still don't fully see you anyway. And here's the part most people don't realize. You're not difficult to understand. You're not broken. You're not lacking clarity. The issue is not within you. The issue is that the systems people use to interpret reality, psychological, emotional, even spiritual, are built on a limited framework. They are designed to process what is familiar, what is consistent, what is measurable. And you don't operate within those boundaries. That's why people keep trying to figure you out but never quite succeed. That's why they feel intrigued by you one moment and confused the next. That's why some are drawn to you while others are unsettled by your presence. Because on some level they can sense that there's more to you than what they can access, but they don't have the capacity to decode it. And you've probably noticed something else too. You pick up on things others don't. You sense shifts before they happen. You read between the lines without trying. You feel energies, moods, intentions that haven't even been spoken yet. And when you try to explain these things, people either dismiss it or they don't take it seriously. Not because it isn't real, but because it doesn't exist within their range of experience. So you start holding things in. You stop explaining. You stop sharing certain insights because you already know how it's going to be received. And slowly, you begin to operate more internally than externally, more in observation than participation. Not because you want to disconnect, but because the connection available to you feels incomplete. But here's the truth that changes everything. And this is where most people get it completely wrong. You're not hard to read, you're not invisible, you're not disconnected. You're operating at a frequency that their perception simply cannot reach. And once you understand that, everything starts to shift. Now here's where everything begins to change. Not just how you see yourself, but how you understand your entire experience. Because what you've been interpreting as rejection, confusion, or disconnection may actually be something else entirely. Something far less personal and far more fundamental. Think about how humans measure reality. Everything is based on detection. If something can be seen, it's real. If it can be measured, it's valid. If it can be repeated and explained, it's accepted. From science to psychology to everyday social behavior, the entire system depends on one assumption: if something exists, it should be detectable within the tools we have. But that assumption has limits. Even in physics, there are things we know exist that we cannot directly observe. Fields, forces, probabilities, these are not always visible, but their effects are undeniable. The idea of a field itself points to something deeper than objects. It suggests that reality isn't just made of things. It's made of interactions, patterns, invisible structures that influence everything without always being seen. Now bring that idea back to you. What if your experience, the feeling of being misunderstood, the sense that people can't quite read you, isn't a flaw in your personality but a mismatch between your internal complexity and the external systems trying to interpret it? In simpler terms, people are using limited tools to understand something that isn't limited. Imagine trying to listen to a high-frequency signal using a device that only picks up lower ranges. The signal is there, it's real, it's transmitting clearly, but the device can't access it. So from the device's perspective, there's nothing there, or worse, it registers noise, distortion, something that doesn't make sense. That's what it often feels like when people try to understand you. They're not intentionally misunderstanding you. They're working within the range they know. Their emotional vocabulary, their perception, their life experience, all of it creates a kind of bandwidth. And when something falls outside that bandwidth, it doesn't get translated correctly. This doesn't make you superior, and it doesn't make them inferior. It simply means there's a difference in range. And this is where the idea of the quantum field becomes useful, not as a mystical label, but as a way of describing complexity. In physics, a field isn't a single thing. It's a system of possibilities, interactions, probabilities that exist all at once. It doesn't behave in a simple linear way. If you think of your mind, your awareness, your emotional depth in a similar way, multi-layered, non-linear, constantly integrating different inputs, it starts to make sense why simple interpretations fall short. You don't experience life in straight lines. You connect ideas across time. You notice patterns others overlook. You hold contradictions without needing immediate resolution. That kind of processing isn't easily categorized. It doesn't fit into quick labels, and that's exactly why people struggle to measure you. Here's the human side of this, the part that actually matters in your day-to-day life. You've probably had moments where you tried to explain something important to you, and the response you got felt flat, not wrong, just incomplete, like the other person only heard half of what you meant. Or you've shared a feeling, and instead of being understood, it was simplified into advice that didn't quite fit. That gap, that space between what you experience and what others perceive, is where most of your frustration lives. But what if that gap isn't something you need to close completely? What if it's something you need to understand and navigate differently? Because here's the reality, not everyone will be able to meet you at the depth you naturally operate in. And forcing that connection, pushing yourself to be fully understood by everyone, can become exhausting. It turns every interaction into a kind of performance where you're constantly adjusting, translating, explaining, and over time that can drain you. So the value in understanding this isn't about creating distance from people. It's about creating clarity within yourself. You start to recognize that when someone doesn't fully get you, it's not always a failure on your part or theirs. Sometimes it's simply a difference in how each of you processes reality. That realization alone can change how you show up. Instead of over-explaining, you become more selective with your energy. Instead of shrinking yourself, you become more aware of where you can actually expand. Instead of expecting every connection to go deep, you begin to appreciate different levels of interaction for what they are, without needing them to be something else. And something else starts to happen when you shift like this. You begin to notice the few people who do resonate with you, not perfectly, not completely, but enough that the gap feels smaller. Conversations feel more natural. You don't have to translate every thought. There's a sense of ease, even if it's subtle. Those connections might be rare, but they exist. And they become more visible when you stop trying to force alignment everywhere else. This is where the idea of being too advanced to detect needs to be grounded. It's not about being beyond everyone. It's about recognizing that your way of thinking, feeling, and perceiving might not always match the tools others are using to understand you. And once you accept that, you stop taking every misunderstanding as something you need to fix. You start asking a different question, not why don't they understand me, but is this a space where understanding is even possible? That question protects your energy. It also gives you something more valuable than constant validation. It gives you direction. Because when you stop trying to be fully measured by every system around you, you create room to understand yourself on your own terms. And that's where real stability begins, not in being perfectly seen by everyone, but in no longer depending on that to feel grounded. From here, the next step isn't just understanding that you operate differently. It's understanding what that actually means. Now let's bring this down to something real, something you can actually feel and apply. Because if you leave this at a vague idea like, I'm just different, it won't help you. In fact, it can confuse you even more. So what does it actually mean in human terms to feel like you're operating outside the range people can easily understand? It means your mind and emotions don't move in simple, straight lines. Most people experience life in a fairly linear way. Something happens, they react, they process it, and they move on. Their thoughts follow a sequence. Their emotions rise and fall in patterns they can predict. Their decisions are based on what's immediately in front of them. There's nothing wrong with that. It's efficient, it works, and it fits well within the system society has built. But your experience is different. You don't just react, you connect. One moment triggers 10 layers of meaning. A single conversation can make you think about the past, the future, and possibilities that haven't even happened yet. You don't just hear words, you pick up on tone, energy, intention, and what's left unsaid. And all of that happens almost instantly, often without you even trying. That's not too much. That's depth. But here's where it becomes challenging. The world around you isn't always designed for that kind of depth. It rewards clarity, speed, simplicity. It prefers answers over questions, certainty over exploration. So when you bring a more layered way of thinking into those environments, it can feel like you're out of sync. Not wrong, just out of sync. And over time, that mismatch can create pressure. Pressure to simplify your thoughts. Pressure to hide parts of your perspective. Pressure to respond in ways that feel easier for others to understand, even if they don't fully represent what you're actually thinking or feeling. You've probably done this more times than you can count. You start explaining something, then halfway through you stop yourself and think, they're not going to get this. So you shorten it, you filter it, you reduce it to something more acceptable. And in that moment you might gain understanding, but you lose accuracy. That's the trade-off. And if you repeat that pattern long enough, you start to feel disconnected from your own voice. Not because you don't know what you think, but because you've gotten used to editing it before it ever fully comes out. This is one of the most important things to understand. Being too advanced to detect doesn't mean you're unreachable. It means your natural way of processing reality includes more layers than most quick interactions can hold. It also means you're comfortable sitting with things that don't have immediate answers. You can hold uncertainty without rushing to close it. You can see multiple perspectives at once without needing to pick one instantly. You can sense that something is off even when there's no clear evidence yet. That kind of awareness takes patience, and it often doesn't translate well in fast-paced, surface-level conversations. So people might think you're hesitant or overthinking or unclear. But what's actually happening is that you're processing more variables than they realize. There's also an emotional side to this. You don't just feel your own emotions, you often absorb the atmosphere around you. You notice when someone's tone shifts slightly, you pick up on tension in a room before anything is said. You sense when someone is holding something back, even if they're smiling. And again, this isn't a problem, it's sensitivity combined with awareness. But if you don't understand it, it can become overwhelming. Because without clear boundaries, you start carrying things that aren't even yours. You feel drained after certain interactions without knowing why. You need more time alone to reset, not because you dislike people, but because your system processes more information than it shows on the surface. That's not weakness, that's capacity. And capacity needs management. So the real value here isn't just recognizing that you operate differently. It's learning how to work with that difference, instead of constantly trying to override it. Here are a few grounded ways to start doing that. First, slow down your need to be instantly understood. Not every thought needs to be fully translated in every moment. Sometimes it's enough to express part of it and let the rest stay with you. That's not hiding, it's choosing where your energy goes. Second, pay attention to where you feel most natural. There are certain environments, certain people, certain types of conversations where you don't feel the need to filter as much. Notice those. They matter more than you think. They show you where your natural way of being actually fits. Third, create space for your own processing. Whether that's through writing, thinking, or just sitting quietly, give yourself time to let your thoughts unfold without interruption. When you don't rush yourself internally, you don't feel as pressured externally. And fourth, this might be the most important, stop using misunderstanding as a measure of your value. Not everyone needs to fully understand you for you to be valid. Not every conversation needs to reach your depth for it to be meaningful. And not every space needs to match your frequency for you to belong somewhere in the world. Because being too advanced to detect, in practical terms, doesn't mean you're above others or separate from them. It means you have access to a wider range of perception, and with that comes a responsibility to manage it in a way that keeps you grounded, not isolated. And once you start doing that, something shifts. You stop feeling like you're constantly out of place. And you start realizing you are never lost. You just needed a better way to understand how you work. Now let's make this real, not abstract, not mystical, but grounded in your everyday experience. Because it's one thing to hear that you're different, and it's another thing to actually recognize how that shows up in your life in a way that makes sense and helps you move forward. A lot of what people call signs can sound dramatic or exaggerated, so instead of treating these like labels, think of them as patterns, things you may have noticed about yourself but never fully understood. The first pattern is misunderstanding, not the occasional kind that everyone experiences, but a consistent feeling that people don't quite land on what you mean. You explain something clearly, and somehow it gets simplified or misinterpreted. You're not confused about your own thoughts, but the response you get makes it seem like there's a gap between what you said and what they heard. Over time, this can become frustrating. You start questioning whether you're expressing yourself correctly, but if you look closely, you'll notice it's not about clarity. It's about depth. You're communicating in layers, and others are receiving in snapshots. The value here is recognizing when to go deeper, and when not to. Not every situation requires your full perspective. Learning to adjust how much you share, without changing who you are, protects your energy and reduces unnecessary frustration. The second pattern is a specific kind of loneliness. Not just being alone, but feeling alone even when you're around people. Conversations happen, interactions happen, but something feels slightly off, like you're participating on the surface while a deeper part of you remains untouched. This isn't because you can't connect. It's because the level of connection you naturally seek isn't always available in every environment. And here's the important shift. Instead of seeing that as a permanent state, start seeing it as feedback. It tells you where depth exists and where it doesn't. That awareness helps you stop expecting deep connection in places that are only built for light interaction. And when you stop forcing depth where it can't happen, that feeling of loneliness starts to ease. The third pattern is being labeled in ways that don't fully fit. Mysterious, hard to read, too intense, different. These labels are often given when people sense complexity but can't define it. It's not a precise description. It's a placeholder for something they don't fully understand. The risk here is internalizing those labels and letting them shape how you see yourself. But the value is in reframing them. Mysterious can simply mean you don't reveal everything at once. Intense can mean you're fully present and engaged. Hard to read can mean you don't operate on obvious patterns. When you reinterpret these labels, they stop feeling like judgments and start becoming neutral observations. The fourth pattern is heightened awareness. You notice small changes, tone, body language, atmosphere. You sense when something isn't right, even if there's no clear reason yet. Sometimes you understand situations before they fully unfold. This can feel confusing, especially when others don't see what you see. But instead of immediately trusting or dismissing it, treat it as information, not a conclusion. Awareness is useful when it's balanced with observation. You don't need to act on every feeling, but you also don't need to ignore it. Let it guide your attention, not control your decisions. The fifth pattern is needing space to reset. After social interactions, busy environments, or emotionally heavy situations, you might feel drained in a way that others around you don't seem to experience as strongly. This isn't about being antisocial, it's about processing load. If you take in more detail, emotionally, mentally, socially, you naturally need more time to sort through it. The value here is simple but powerful. Give yourself that space without guilt. Instead of pushing through exhaustion or forcing yourself to keep up, recognize that recovery is part of how you function effectively. Even short breaks, quiet time, stepping away from stimulation, limiting input, can make a significant difference. The sixth pattern is questioning where you belong. You might feel like you don't fully fit into one group, one mindset, or one way of thinking. You can relate to different perspectives, but you don't feel completely defined by any of them. This can feel unsettling, but it's also a strength. It means you're flexible. You can move between ideas, understand different viewpoints, and adapt without losing your core. The key is not forcing yourself into a fixed identity just to feel certain. You're allowed to be evolving. Now here's where all of this comes together. None of these patterns mean you're undetectable in some absolute sense. You're still here, you still connect, you still communicate. What they mean is that your way of processing and expressing doesn't always align with the default expectations around you. And once you understand that, you stop treating these patterns as problems that need to be fixed. You start treating them as signals that need to be managed. That's where the real value is. Because when you manage them well, you stop over-explaining yourself in situations where it won't make a difference. You choose your environments more intentionally. You protect your energy without isolating yourself. You recognize the difference between being misunderstood and being in the wrong setting. And most importantly, you stop turning every difficult interaction into a personal issue. Sometimes, it's not about you at all. It's about the match between what you bring and what the situation can hold. Once you see that clearly, something changes. You become less reactive, less frustrated, less dependent on being fully seen by everyone around you, and more focused on building a life where your natural way of thinking and feeling actually has space to exist. Because at the end of the day, the goal isn't to be understood by everyone. It's to understand yourself well enough that misunderstanding doesn't shake you, and from that place, you don't just feel different. You feel steady. At this point, everything you felt, every moment of being misunderstood, every time you held back your thoughts, every time you felt that quiet distance even in a crowded room, it starts to make more sense. Not in a dramatic, life-changing flash, but in a steady, grounded way. Because the truth is, nothing about you suddenly changed. What changed is how you understand yourself. And that shift is where your real power is. Now the question becomes, what do you actually do with this? Not in theory, not in a motivational sense, but in your real, everyday life. The first thing is simple, but not easy. You stop trying to be understood by everyone, not in a defensive way, not in a I don't care about anyone way, but in a clear, calm understanding that not every person, not every environment, and not every moment is built for the level of depth you carry. And when you truly accept that, something inside you relaxes. You stop over-explaining. You stop replaying conversations in your head, wondering what you should have said differently. You stop trying to adjust yourself just enough to finally click with people who were never operating on the same level of perception to begin with. That doesn't mean you disconnect from people. It means you interact without losing yourself. The second thing, you stop shrinking. Think about how many times you've toned yourself down just to make things easier. You spoke less, felt less, shared less. Not because that's who you are, but because it was more convenient for others. But every time you do that, you create a small gap between who you are and how you show up. And over time, those small gaps turn into disconnection. Not from others, but from yourself. So instead of shrinking, you start choosing. Choosing when to go deep. Choosing when to keep things simple. Choosing where your full presence is actually welcomed. That's not hiding. That's awareness. The third thing, you become more intentional with connection. You stop expecting every relationship to give you everything. Some people are great for light conversations. Some are good for shared experiences. and a very small number, maybe 1 or 2, can meet you at a deeper level. When you understand this, you stop being disappointed by what people can't give and start appreciating what they can. And ironically, your relationships become healthier because of it. Less pressure, less expectation, more clarity. The fourth thing, you trust your own perception. For a long time, you may have doubted yourself because others didn't always see what you saw or feel what you felt. You second-guessed your instincts. You looked for confirmation outside. But now, you begin to balance that. You don't blindly trust every thought or feeling, but you don't dismiss them either. You observe them, you test them, you learn from them, and slowly your internal voice becomes something you can rely on, not because it's always right, but because you understand how it works. That's confidence. Not loud, not forced, but steady. The fifth thing, you redefine loneliness. This is important, because that feeling of being alone, it doesn't completely disappear, but it changes. Instead of feeling like rejection, it starts to feel like space. Space to think, space to reset, space to exist without constantly adjusting yourself. And within that space, something new grows. A sense of independence that isn't isolating but grounding. You realize you can be by yourself without feeling incomplete. And when you connect with others, it's because you want to, not because you need them to confirm your existence. That shift changes everything. Now, here's what happens when you fully accept all of this. You stop chasing validation that was never consistent to begin with. You stop forcing yourself into places where you don't naturally fit. You start building a life that actually matches how you think, feel, and operate. And slowly, without forcing it, you begin to attract the right kind of connections. The ones where you don't have to explain every layer of yourself just to be understood. Not perfect connections, not constant, but real. And that's enough. But let's be honest for a moment. What happens if you don't accept this? You keep trying. You keep adjusting. You keep proving, explaining, shrinking, expanding, over and over again, hoping that eventually something will click. And maybe sometimes it does temporarily, but it never fully satisfies you, because deep down you're still operating against your natural way of being, and that's exhausting, not immediately, but over time. So this isn't about choosing between being special or normal. It's about choosing between understanding yourself or constantly trying to fit into something that doesn't quite match. And that choice is yours. No one else can make it for you. So here's where we bring everything together. You're not undetectable because something is wrong with you. You're not difficult because you lack clarity. You're not alone because you don't belong anywhere. You've simply been trying to measure yourself using systems that were never designed for the way you operate. And once you see that clearly, you stop fighting yourself. You stop explaining your existence. You stop waiting to be fully understood before allowing yourself to move forward. Instead, you just start living in alignment with what you already know about yourself. And that's where things begin to stabilize. Not perfectly, not instantly, but genuinely. So before you leave, take a second. If even a part of this resonated with you, if you've ever felt misunderstood, out of sync, or like you don't quite fit into the usual patterns, type this in the comments, undetectable. Not as a label, but as a reminder that you don't need to be fully measured by everyone to fully exist as yourself. And if this gave you clarity, share it with someone who might need to hear it. Because there are more people like you out there than you think. They're just not always easy to recognize. Just like you. And remember this, say it once clearly for yourself. I am not undetectable because I'm broken. I am undetectable because I'm ahead. Then stop trying to prove it and start living it.